Are you wondering how protests and police defunding affect the housing market? Well, in today's video, we're going to take a look at that. If you've been following the news, you've no doubt heard about the ongoing protests in cities across the U.S. Today, we're going to take a look at what's happening in Minneapolis, New York, San Francisco, and Seattle to see how civil unrest affects housing market trends. We'll also go over some studies correlating crime to housing prices, so let's dive in. But first, please take a moment to like and subscribe. It really helps me out, doesn't cost you anything, and all you have to do is this. This article a couple of weeks back really caught my attention. The headline reads, "A staggering number of homes just hit the market in Minneapolis." It appears that residents of Minneapolis are looking to leave their city amidst a wave of unrest and a campaign led by the Progressive City Council to abolish its own police force. 22% of the 612 homes listed for sale in Minneapolis on Zillow were posted there within the last 2 weeks. A staggering 43% of the 740 apartments for rent listed on Zillow hit the site since the riots began. And I'll put a link to this article in the description below. So Minneapolis endured over a month of protests after George Floyd was killed by a police officer kneeling on his neck. This terrible event has now morphed into widespread demonstrations, riots, looting and violence in major American cities from coast to coast. And this cannot be good for anyone living in the urban areas near where these protests are taking place. One of the offshoots of these protests is a movement to defund the police. And in some places, law enforcement is being confronted, harassed, and shot at, or even run over by protester vehicles. People are angry and the police are kind of under siege. In some cities, they've responded by standing down or standing aside, ostensibly to defuse the situation. So, some neighborhoods are not being patrolled. Some calls to 911 are not being responded to. While public monuments are torn down and city blocks set on fire, people are breaking the law and getting away with it. When this happens, the criminal element takes notice. If they know the police aren't out there, robberies, murders, and violent assaults skyrocket. Talented people with resources take a look at what's happening around them and say, "I'm out of here," and move out of the big cities, leaving those who can't at the mercy of the criminal element. None of this is good for property values. Do you remember what happened to Detroit? That city's population fell from 1.85 million in 1950 to 701,000 by 2013. Detroit's decline began mainly when structural changes in the auto industry led to the steady loss of manufacturing jobs over several decades. It all starts with job loss. Additionally, capital-unfriendly policies like high taxes, burdensome regulations, poor city services, and plain old corruption have continued to drive the city's decline. In Detroit, you can still get a little fixer cottage for under $40,000. Not sure if you'll get city services or police protection with that. You'll have to do the research. Law and order with honest and accountable public administration is the basis of your good property value. Hey there.
Hey there.
In New York, apparently the criminal justice system is imploding. According to this article, as calls for defunding and reforming the police department have gained steam since the killing of George Floyd, New York City has seen a 24% increase in homicides year over year, with the homicide rate hitting a 5-year high as the amount of people shot jumped 42% compared to last year. There have been 166 homicides to date, compared with 134 from 2019. Additionally, COVID-19 shutdowns have impacted the judicial system, leading to a breakdown in the city's social safety nets. with prisoners being released from jail straight into homelessness and case deferments hindering the NYPD's efforts to contain crime. Meanwhile, Connecticut, the Hamptons, and other suburban areas outside New York are seeing record real estate sales right now, as those with the means to escape a possible second wave of COVID and the social unrest plaguing parts of the city vote with their feet. At the height of the protests, the NYPD counted 72 demonstrations in one day. Windows were smashed, stores were looted, and there was violence. This is a scary situation for most people who just want to live their daily lives, walk the dog, see friends, go to restaurants, just hang out. 2 years ago, the New York metropolitan area was losing 100 people per day on average, most of it to Florida, according to the moving companies. Now it's closer to 270 people per day. On July 3rd, there were 7,764 properties listed for sale in Manhattan on Zillow. 1,823 of them, or 23%, were listed in the last 30 days. As of the end of June, according to Mike Del Preti's real estate tracker, new listings in New York City were up 25% year over year, while at the same time, year-over-year pendings were down 57%. New York City's residential rental market predictably declined during the coronavirus pandemic, with new lease signings reaching their lowest number in a decade in May, and rents declining across every borough. The question is, will this continue? With crime on the rise, will people feel safe enough to return to New York? And will they even want to, considering the reduced amenities available throughout the city? With the high cost of living there, high rents, high taxes, high utilities, and the risks of disruption from continuing social unrest, increasing crime, and an overwhelmed court system, is it even worth it? Especially now, given that so many people can work from home. Over in San Francisco, another city that many residents are fleeing, Mike Del Preti's real estate tracker also shows higher numbers of new listings and lower numbers of pendings. Year over year, new listings are up 27%, while pendings are down 5% as of the end of June. A little less dramatic than New York, perhaps, but the warning flags are there. Property crime is high in San Francisco. According to the Open Data Network, property crimes in San Francisco are among the highest in the nation at 5,441 incidents per 100,000 people, or 5% of the population. That's higher than in New York City, with only 1,462 incidents of property crime per 100,000 people, or almost 1.5% of the population. But it's not just property crime. According to Neighborhood Scout, San Francisco has an overall crime rate of 64 per 1,000 residents. Your chance of becoming a victim of either violent or property crime there is 1 in 16. And protesters want to defund the police? Homelessness is another well-known problem in San Francisco. The New Yorker recently published an excellent article examining this issue, which I'll link to below. Between 2013 and 2017, calls to 311 about homeless concerns went up by nearly 800%. And stories of incursions from the street abound. Human feces on the sidewalk, tents blocking children's paths to school, being chased by a homeless person wielding a hypodermic needle. There was an official count of 8,694 homeless people in San Francisco in 2019, with roughly 60% of those living on the streets. We have a friend who just sold his condo in trendy Somo, south of Market, because he was tired of sidestepping the growing number of homeless people laying around the sidewalk in front of his house, urinating and defecating on the street, because where else were they going to do it? Interestingly, New York City has an even bigger homeless problem, but somehow they've managed to provide beds for almost every one of them, whereas San Francisco only has beds for about 40%. For whatever reason, City leaders can't seem to solve these issues of crime and homelessness in their neighborhoods, so property owners are leaving and they're dropping prices if they have to get out. According to Compass, the median price San Francisco home dropped from $1.685 million to $1.628 million in May of 2020, while the median price of a condo dropped from $1.235 million to $1.1 million during the same time period. This represents contracts likely entered into during March and April at the height of the pandemic, with perhaps some discounting by buyers for risk. We'll see if this is a trend that continues. Rents are also dropping in San Francisco and around the Bay Area in the face of rising inventory. For a one-bedroom apartment in the city, rents are down 12% year over year, and down 15% for a one-bedroom in Mountain View, according to Zumper. There were 2,767 properties for rent in San Francisco as of July 3rd, with 1,777 or 64% of them being listed in the last 30 days. A recent survey from Blind, an anonymous professional network, found that 28% of people in the Bay Area who have the option to work from home plan to relocate out of the metro area, and 27% would leave the state. Notably, looking at moving services, the one-way price for moving out of the city is a lot higher than the price for moving in due to high demand. But it's not just homeowners moving out. Renters are also increasingly fleeing restless urban areas. One client that I spoke with living in the region said that protesters in his neighborhood were popping off firecrackers at 4 a.m. in the morning for whatever reason, like every morning, and he was finding it really hard to sleep with all the commotion. Who wants to live like that? I would move too. And then we have CHOP, which stands for Capitol Hill Organized Protest, also known as CHAZ, the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone. This was an occupied protest and self-declared autonomous zone in the Capitol Hill neighborhood of Seattle, established on June 8th. Covering 6 city blocks and a park, there had been a week of tense interactions between protesters and police, starting on June 1 and escalating on June 7th. After a man drove his vehicle into the protesters and shot one of them. Tear gas, flashbangs, and pepper spray were repeatedly used by police for crowd control until the mayor stepped in and banned the tear gas. Can you imagine being a resident in this neighborhood? At the height of the conflict, the police boarded up and moved out of the East Precinct in an effort to de-escalate the situation. Local governance in the zone was decentralized with the goal of creating a neighborhood without police. Protesters demanded rent control, the reversal of gentrification, the abolition or defunding of police, funding of community health, and releasing prisoners serving time for marijuana-related offenses or resisting arrest with expungement of their records. During the day, it was kind of like a mini Burning Man, so kind of festive. But as time went on at night, it took on a more sinister tone. There's this really interesting video of 2 white guys walking around CHOP at night, and I'll put a link to the video down below. Most people were friendly, but some definitely were not. On June 12th, the Seattle police chief reported that rapes, robberies, and all sorts of violent acts were occurring in the area, but they were unable to get to any of it. In the early morning hours that same day, an unknown man set a fire at the East Precinct building where the police station was located and walked away. Community residents extinguished the flames before they could spread to other buildings. On June 24th, a dozen businesses, residents, and property owners filed a class action lawsuit in federal court against the city of Seattle, which they alleged had deprived them of due process by tolerating the zone. Stating that they did not wish to undermine the participants' message, the plaintiffs declared that their legal rights were overrun by the city's unprecedented decision to abandon and close off an entire city neighborhood, isolating them from the city services, for which they pay, I might add. The plaintiffs sought compensation for lost business, property damage, and deprivation of their property rights, plus restoration of full public access. And who can blame them? It doesn't matter what color you are. You don't want Burning Man showing up on your doorstep, doing whatever they want, whenever they want, all day, all night, for who knows how long. And if you've been to Burning Man, you know it is 24/7 mayhem all the time. There were 4 total shootings, and sadly, a 16-year-old boy died before the city finally took back control with police clearing the area. And who knows how many cases of COVID are going to come out of all that. So CHOP illustrates quite clearly what happens when law enforcement isn't present. There were 78 property listings in Capitol Hill on Zillow on July 3rd, and 33 or 42% of them had been listed in the last 30 days. Perhaps some residents have had enough. There have been several studies done on the impact of crime on property values, but here are 3 of note. The first, a 2012 report by the Center for American Progress, looked at the direct and indirect costs of homicide in 8 U.S. metropolitan areas: Seattle, Milwaukee, Houston, Dallas, Boston, Philadelphia, Chicago, and Jacksonville. The direct annual costs of violent crime in the 8 cities totaled $3.7 billion per year, an average of $320 per person per year. And the study found that a 10% reduction in homicides would lead to a 0.83% increase in housing values the following year. The second study, a 2012 report by the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, looked at the issue in Latin America. The authors found that a decrease of crime generated by heightened policing in Rio de Janeiro contributed to a fall in crime and a rise in property values. Homicides dropped 10 to 25% and robberies 10 to 20%, while the selling price of properties in the area increased between 5% and 10%. And this increase was proportionately higher in low-income neighborhoods. In addition, the study found significant evidence that from 2008 to mid-2011, increased policing generated a 15% increase in formal property transactions. The third study in 2008 found that housing prices within 1/10 of a mile of a registered sex offender fell by 4% on average. And I'll link to these studies below. So pretty much, in response to crime risk, residents have 2 options. They can vote for anti-crime measures, or they can vote with their feet. You too. And when people vote with their feet, that impacts the housing market, as we're seeing in Minneapolis, New York, San Francisco, and Seattle. Are these cities now experiencing significant structural change like Detroit did 70 years ago? Will the loss of city-based jobs and the exodus of home-based workers, accelerated by the COVID pandemic, drive more social unrest, police cutbacks, and drops in neighborhood values for those left behind? Or is all this just temporary on the road to a checkmark recovery? Well, we may need reforms when it comes to police spending. Extreme defunding probably isn't the best move. The Seattle experience illustrates just how quickly anarchy devolves into violence, destruction, and murder. The foundation of civilization is built on the rule of law. Without it, there can be no trust. Without trust, there's no stability, no safety. Nothing gets done because everyone's in survival mode, trying to protect whatever they have. We need to maintain trust, cherish our collective heritage, our cultures, our economy, and our way of life, else all that America stands for will be destroyed. So, are you seeing any impacts from reduced policing or social unrest where you live? Put your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're thinking about selling your house, this may be the best time in the next 10 years. And if you want to know why, watch this video here. Or if you've been wondering if 8 to 9 million landlords are going to crash the housing market, watch this video here. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. And robbery, oh my God, there's an ant and it just won't go away. And the wind kicks up. Waiting for the wind. The wind, the ants, the shirt's wrinkled, the The camera keeps focusing on the wrong thing. Or is all this just temporary on the road to a checkmark recovery? Okay, I'm gonna do that all over again. Filming outside is hard. You control nothing. Nothing. Oh my gosh, you have no idea what we go through to get a video together for you. Oh my God. Oh God, it's still recording. Okay, recording this again because the camera keeps focusing on what's behind me. So forgive me if I'm too close, but that's how I keep it focused. Oh, I think we did it.